Good evening and welcome to a short presentation, interactive presentation on the subject of choosing your ACCA option papers. My name's Paul Merison. I am the head of ACCA courses at the London School of Business and Finance. I am also one of the senior tutors here, including of paper P7, one of the option papers that is of course part of the subject of this presentation. So firstly, let me apologise for the delay this evening as we had a little bit of a technical challenge, shall we say. But we have now resolved that, it seems, so we are good to go. I've got a presentation that I'm going to take you through about option papers, what papers there are, how you might make the decision about what to go for. But this is very much designed to be an example, a demonstration of how we run our online classes. And so because of that, whilst I am here to present some information to you, please feel free to type in questions as we go. Any questions that you type in, I will see on a screen, which is just to the side of me here, which you cannot see. And anything you ask, I will answer on camera. So in particular, if you are someone choosing your option papers at the moment, maybe you've chosen option papers in the past, haven't been successful, looking for some advice, please make the most of this so that we can get the most out of this session, and importantly, you can get the most out of this session. Now, typically when we run our classes for each paper, our live classes, I will be up here as a tutor using one of these things, a pen. So we'll have material on the screen, but I will be doing a lot of writing, partly to answer the questions I'm being asked by the students in the class, but also to make it as interactive and as personal as possible. But tonight I'm not going to be writing. Instead, I will give you my answers verbally, and the presentation is all pre-produced to give me a nice simple script to go through. So let's begin, and as I said, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free. Right, here we go. Now when we do our classes, we have various settings we can use to give you some variety up on the screen. We will typically begin and end each class like this, so with the tutor on screen, able to talk directly to you. But when we get into the specific content, we will do that. So let's get going then and take a look at choosing your option papers. Okay, now if we go with the easy bit first of all, there are of course 4 option papers available with ACCA, P4, 5, 6 and 7. And in terms of those option papers, you can see they all begin with the word advanced. Now obviously you can see that, most of you would know that already, but the key point here is that all of these papers follow on from a lower level exam paper which doesn't have the word advanced in, and that is one of the key factors to consider when you are choosing your option papers. Now, it's also worth knowing that as with some of the other lower level exam papers, some of the option papers there's more than one variety that you can choose. So P6, advanced tax. Tax, of course, is different in every country of the world, pretty much. And so over the years, as student numbers have built up in different countries around the world, those countries have gone to the ACCA and said, please, can we have an ACCA exam paper based on our tax? So as a result, quite a few countries have got their own variant. P7 also has a few variants on advanced audit and assurance, but not quite as spectacular as with the tax. I'll talk more about the variance in a little while. Right. Enough already about the options. Let's talk about the choice, because that's why I'm here with you doing this class. There are a lot of considerations here. Some of them will apply to every student. For some students, it might come down to something very, very simple. What I'm going to do is present to you some of the things you might want to consider when deciding what your option papers might be, and then I'll leave it to you to decide which of them are the most important. But I'll give you a little view from myself as we go through. So here we go. Let's begin with pass rates. Now, we need to be a little bit careful here. We need to be a little bit careful. There are thousands of students sitting the ACCA's exams. Just to give you a picture on that, in the December 2014 sitting that we've just had, 195,000 students sat a total of 335,000 papers. So it's important to realise that the pass rate is made up of thousands of students, not you. So, very, very dangerous to base your decision based on pass rates. Because just because lots of other people can pass it or lots of other people can fail it, does not mean that you will pass or fail. Now, obviously, if an exam has an 80% pass rate and another exam has a 10% pass rate, that is probably telling you something about how easy or hard it is to pass. But the simple fact is that the 4 option papers have relatively similar pass rates. Now, it is a fact that over the past few years or so, P7 has had the worst pass rate on average of all 16 ACCA papers, let alone the options. But it's not been the worst by much. P4 is 15th out of 16, by the way. But it's also the case that right at the moment, P5 has been the one causing the most trouble over the last few sittings. So these things tend to go in waves anyway. One other thought about pass rates: please be very careful when looking at the P6 pass rate. Remember, there are a lot of variants around the world, and the pass rate on P6 varies quite a bit country by country. Simple reason, if you take the United Kingdom, we have a relatively complicated tax system built up over something like 200 years. There are other countries where the tax system is a lot simpler, so do be wary of looking at pass rates, especially with P6. Next thing to consider, the feeder paper. I think this is the most important factor of everything, and there are a lot of factors to consider. As I said earlier on, each one of these advanced papers comes from a lower level paper. So P4 from F9, P5 from F5, P6 from F6, and P7 from F8. Just to give you a simple view on this, I was never very good when I was studying tax, largely because tax involves quite a bit of effort, because you've got to get quite a bit of knowledge in there before you can start understanding it. I was much better at auditing, because auditing to me seems to require very little knowledge. It was about technique and application. If you are someone who is good at F6, well, that suggests that you've got a pretty good foundation to build on for P6. On the contrary, if you're rubbish at F8, why are you even thinking about doing P7? Surely you'll have very similar struggles. I've just taught a student last term who had 2 papers left in her ACCA journey, F8 and P7. Now you might ask the question, if you can't pass F8 fairly quickly, why did you even pick P7? But having said all of this, it is worth pointing out that she did pass F8 and P7. She passed them both. So I suppose you could argue that once you work out the skill to pass, If it's the same skill but applied to harder situations, maybe you end up passing both papers. So my advice would be, if you didn't really do very well at the lower level paper, do you really want to pick that as the higher level one? And I know what you're thinking. You're saying, but Paul, I got 51.5% on all my F papers. Well, if you're only just passing papers, once you get up to the options, they are going to be more of a struggle. It's not just how difficult though. There's also an enjoyment factor here. If you got 51% on F6, but you absolutely loved studying tax, well fine, maybe P6 is for you then. It is a fact that when we are studying, in fact, when we're doing anything in life, things tend to stick in our head based on emotions. When I was younger, my parents would always say, oh, we remember where we were when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I guess the modern variant of that is going to be 9/11. Everyone will remember where they were when they heard, when they saw the TV pictures, etc. And that's because of the shock factor. You might remember your first date because not the shock factor, but the warm romantic feelings factor. Feelings help us to remember things. Now, I'd be a little bit nervous if you said I picked this exam paper hoping for shock and romance, because that doesn't really attach to your accountancy studies. Well, not much, one hopes. But if you at least enjoy being in the room studying, you enjoy the whole experience of that exam paper, it's more likely to help the subject stick. So think back to the feeder papers and ask yourself, does that give me a clear message of maybe what to do, or maybe at least one of the options not to do? And on that subject, similar subject, your tutor is also going to be an important factor. If you're distance learning, then a lot of your studying might be on your own. If you're studying online, as we are now, if you are studying in a classroom, then the student-tutor relationship is very important. Most students, when we say, well, how do you choose which college, which group to study in, the tutor is very high on the list, because that is such a big part of your studying. If you don't get on with the tutor, you don't like the tutor, it's going to cause some damage to your studying, surely. So as I said before, emotions, feelings help you learn. If you can't even remember studying F5, well, if you can't remember the classes and the tutor, if that's the same person teaching you P5, it doesn't suggest it's going to be a very inspiring thing for you to do, does it? Now, you don't have to have the same tutor. Of course, it might be the subject you like. Who knows? But if you do have a tutor from a lower level paper where you think, yeah, that really worked for me, I can remember everything, they really inspired me. If they inspire you once, they'll probably inspire you again. So worth considering. Now, many people say to me, Paul, I want to go off and do this as a job. Which option papers should I take? And I have to say, when it comes to career, I'm not sure I would get that excited about it. If you're expecting a future employer to start questioning you about which option papers you did, bear in mind that most future employers won't even know there were option papers in ACCA, so they won't bother asking. There are some exceptions to that, but not many. By far the most important thing for you to do is to finish the exams and get the qualification. And if that means doing a certain couple of option papers, because that seems to get you to the finishing line quicker, I'd go with that if I were you. Having said that, it will matter in some jobs. Not all jobs, but it will have an impact in some. And if you've got quite a specialist career plan lined up, then maybe it is worth taking that view. It should be pointed out that you can always come back at a later time and pay ACCA to sit a third option paper if an employer demanded it. And even if the employer didn't demand it, but you felt you needed the knowledge, you can always go on a course and study a third option paper but never sit the exam. So there's always time to come back and do something about this. Having said that, if you are planning at some point to be a registered auditor, so in other words, not just work for an audit firm, but at some point become the partner with the pen who's signing the audit report, then you will need to have done P7. And P7 variant for the country in which you wish to practice as an auditor. So if you want to be an auditor in the UK, number one, you have to do P7, and number two, it needs to be the P7 UK variant. On the other hand, if you have no plans ever to be an auditor, it would be a rather odd subject to choose because it is so specialist. Tax, of course, is useful to all of us because we all pay tax. Financial management, performance management, I could see both of those having a value in different types of job. With auditing, even though I'm an audit tutor and I think it's a fascinating paper, if you're not going into audit, one questions the reason why you'd want to do it. Unless you want to become an audit tutor, of course. For those papers that have variants, you also need to make sure you've considered whether you're going to get the course that you want. Now on P7, trust me, it does not matter. All of the variants around the world are so close to being identical, we do question sometimes what is the point of having them. The world went international on accounting standards, audit standards, to a certain extent corporate governance and ethics, meaning you really would not notice the difference between a P7 UK exam, Singapore exam, international stream exam, etc. But if you're doing P6, it's going to be rather different. And it's not just making sure there are courses available for the variant, the stream that you wish to do, it's also making sure that if a college says with your course you get lots of other bits and pieces, will you get all the other bits and pieces for that variant? Because potentially you won't. So I'll give you a simple example. If you come to us and say, hello, I live in the UK, but actually I'm very interested in Russia and I'd like to study Russian tax on F6. So F6, not P6, but the same point is there. I'd say, well, actually, we do have F6 courses because we have clients in Russia and they want them. But they're not actually available in the UK in the classroom. They're available in Russia in a classroom. And we have online, but of course it's in Russian because it's done for Russians. So just bear in mind, if you're choosing P6 or P7, just find out what your college does, what it offers, because there is a risk that you're choosing something which the college can't really supply. Now, as far as LSBF is concerned, if you want to do P7 UK, Singapore, international, whatever, makes no difference. Just sign up for P7. It's all good. On P6, on the other hand, you're going to be doing P6 UK if you're doing it live online with us. Now, it's not just variants. I will be with you in a second, Maria. I see the question. It's also, if you want to study at weekends versus evenings, maybe the weekend and the evening are not both available. If you want to study live online, on the other hand, we do that for every paper, so not a problem. Maria, how is the minimum of papers exams that I need to take in order to be qualified? Well, that rather depends on whether you've got exemptions. ACCA, you have to pass 14 exam papers, but it is possible to be exempt for up to 9 of those 14, depending on previous study. So if you've got an accountancy degree, for example, you'll probably get exempt from all the 9 F papers. So minimum 5, no one can do less than 5 papers. And for people with no previous related study, you are doing 14. getting back to our option papers right at the end of the qualification. Combination. You've got to choose 2, not a problem, Maria, anytime. You have got to choose 2 out of 4. It's worth considering that the 4 exam papers are all at a high level, but they do vary in their sort of personality. And so different pairs from those 4 are going to feel a little bit different. So for example, P4 and P6, if you pick up a study manual on those papers, they're rather heavy because those are the 2 that have the highest level of technical content of the 4 options. P5 and P7, on the other hand, there's less of a knowledge requirement. It's more about your ability to apply that knowledge to specific situations. So when I teach P7, most of it is about application. It's about how you do it. It's not so much about you must know this and you must know this and you must practice this 1,000,000 times. It's rather different. Now, what that means is if you are planning to do P4 and P6 as your 2 options, you are signing up to a lot of effort in terms of quantity. You cannot practice exam questions till you've got a certain amount of content in your head. If, on the other hand, you said you were going to do P7, well, we do P7 exam questions almost from the very first class because it's that sort of practical type thing. There's less quantity, it's more about how you go about it. So if you're in a job where you work very long hours and you want to do P4 and P6, well, that is up to you, of course, but just bear in mind what you're taking on. If you want a bit more balance to it, I'd say if you're going to do P4 or P6, you might want to choose P5 or P7 alongside. And that's especially true if, as well as the 2 option papers, you've still got something like P2 left to finish, because P2 is a lot bigger than P1 and P3 in terms of volume of knowledge. Now, there is something else to consider as well, and this is relatively hot off the press news. For some time, the ACCA have told us that they were moving to 4 sittings per year, and that kicks off from September this year. They also announced fairly recently that they are changing the exam timetable in the exam week so that we now have just 1 exam week, 5 days where every paper will be assessed. Now that's important because combinations of exams you can do in the June sitting may no longer be viable from September onwards. So if you are planning your future studies at this point and you've got more than the 2 option papers left to do, understanding which combinations you cannot do in September and beyond is going to be fairly important. For example, from September, it will be impossible to sit P3 and P6 at the same exam sitting because the exams will happen at exactly the same time. Now, of course, you could do September and December with these 2, but if you're looking to finish at 1 sitting, picking your option papers is now going to get a bit more annoying. Likewise, P1 and P5 are going to clash from September onwards. So a little bit of planning is required now to think about which papers you might want to do in June to make sure you don't leave yourself with impossible combinations for September onwards. Needs a bit of thought, this one. So, excuse me, the joys of live, you see, we get illness as well. Quite clearly here, there is a lot to consider when choosing your option papers. To the outside world, it is not that important, to be frank. It's much more important to focus on finishing your exams and becoming an accountant. The outside world pretty much sees 2 ACCA members as the same, whatever options they took. But for your personal exam journey and to keep the pleasure high and the pain as low as possible, choosing sensibly makes a lot of sense. Now, I focus today on people choosing for the first time. One of the common questions I also get asked is, what about if I'm someone who has failed? What if I failed the same option paper 2 or 3 times? Should I keep doing it or start a new one? Whew, difficult question. When someone says I got 45, I'm tempted to say, well, you need 5 more to pass. If you start another one from scratch, you need 50 more to pass, don't you? Probably best to keep going with it and try and understand what you're doing wrong and how you can vary your technique when you sit it again. So lots to consider. I strongly suggest you take your time before you make your final choice. Go take a look at the past exam papers, all of which are on ACCA's website, to get a feel for what the papers look like, and read the examiner's reports. Because often by reading the examiner's report that comes out after each sitting, you soon get an idea of what causes people to fail. And if you're reading this and thinking that's exactly the sort of mistake I would make, well, I think that's telling you your answer, isn't it? Maria has another question. How many papers exams would be reasonable to prepare for an examination date? Okay, so for one sitting. Well, of course, with ACCA, the maximum you can do at one sitting is 4. There are students who do 4, but not very many. Most students do 2. Some do 3. Quite a few just do 1. But I would say the best starting point probably is to think to do 2. Now, it really does vary with who you are. If you are someone who has a job, then let's face it, you're going to be studying evenings, weekends. I would limit it to 2. If you have only a part-time job, or maybe no job at all, well, maybe you could up it to 3 because you've got a bit more time available. On the other hand, you don't have the work experience, which gives you valuable insight into what a lot of these exam papers are about. One thing to consider, though, with the new 4 sittings a year situation is you could, if you're unsure about 2 or 3, do 3, and always know that when it comes round to entering the exams for June, you don't have to enter all 3. You could enter 2 of them and save 1 to sit in September. Because September's not far after June, so the knowledge should still be there, and we will run some sort of course to the September even sitting, which means you can build yourself back up again before you sit. So I would normally say 2, but now we're exams every 3 months, relatively close together. It wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe start 3 papers, knowing you can finish the tuition, just delay your revision course by 3 months to the next sitting. It's taking a bit of a risk because the knowledge won't be quite as fresh, but maybe that's worth a view. Not at all, Maria. Sensible question. One other thing on how many papers. Do bear in mind that as you move up through the qualification, the papers get gradually bigger and harder. So whether you want to take 3 papers when you're getting towards the end, debatable, I think. Now, if anyone, especially Maria, wants to ask any other questions, that is the end of my little presentation, so please feel free. If you don't wish to ask any more questions right at the moment, but tomorrow morning you wake up and suddenly think, oh, if only I'd asked that, please, please, please feel free to email me. My email address is up on the screen, so feel free. And I will answer you as soon as I can. But, as I said, that is the presentation. So let's get rid of that. Let's bring me back. Hello. And go for it. Does anyone wish to ask anything else? Especially about option papers. But you can ask me anything. Any final questions? Okay. Well, thank you for participating. Thank you to Maria in particular for keeping things interesting by asking some questions. And, oh no, we have another one, yes. Anna Kor, I recognise that name. Anna Korbach. Either I've taught you, Anna, on a previous course here, or when I was going through the results list over the last couple of days, I've seen your name on there. You sat in December, didn't you? Sure you did. What are the LSBF plans for the September intake? Ooh, what a good question. Yeah, we are looking at that right at the moment. We've just had the Tutors and Examiners Conference during the last week. So it was on Wednesday and Thursday last week. And ACCA did give us additional information about how that would all work during the conference, how September will work. At the moment, good question as to what we're going to run. We are pretty much concluded that we will definitely run revision courses, both classroom and online, for every paper during August. The difficulty in running anything else is that the June sitting, results, won't come out till August the 1st, which means if we try and run anything before August the 1st, a lot of students won't know what they're able to sit in September, and so we're not entirely convinced we're going to get many people taking us up on it. On the other hand, as I suggested just now, some students might start towards the June sitting and then decide to hold one paper back for September. So my best guess at the moment is, will we run courses in August, so revision type courses? Yes, we will. What will we do between June and July, especially for those students who don't need a resit because they don't know their result yet, but want something to help follow them through? We will do something, but I just haven't decided what that something is yet. I suppose I should use this opportunity, Anna, and ask you, you're asking the questions, so do you already have a plan as to what you want to use the September sitting for? Are you already thinking you might fail a paper in June, so you're planning ahead with resits, or what do you think? Interested to know. That's why I know the name then. You were one of my students. Fantastic, and congratulations. So yeah, let us know. The more people who tell us what they're planning to do, the more likely we are to supply what people want, of course. This September sitting is going to be a little bit strange. In 12 months later, it will be onto a normal cycle by then. But in September, no one can even enter the exams until July after the June sitting. And also some of the rules are changing going forward. Just to share a couple of those with you, from September they will let you sit the 7P papers in any order. So instead of the current rule, which will apply for June, P123, P4567, from September you can mix up the Ps in any order you like. Worth knowing about. Do bear in mind that after the June sitting there will be syllabus changes. We've been told by ACCA not to expect too much, but at the moment the syllabus that kicks off from September 15 through to June 16 has not been published, and until it is we don't know for sure, but it won't be much. So if you do sit in June on a course for June and then decide to wait till September, don't worry, the stuff you've learned in class will be fine. But if that's what you plan to do, don't lose track of us, because we will give you a little syllabus update once we know what that is to make sure you're fully prepared for September. So there we go, Anna. That is the current situation. Once we have our plan fully worked out and made sure it's sensible, we will of course be communicating it to everybody. Does anyone else wish to ask anything? Well, I suspect our little technical issue at the beginning has caused one or two people to disappear. So thank you guys for hanging on. Thank you for the questions. I'm going to say good night at this point. But as I said before, please, if you have any questions, my email address was up on the screen. You can, once you are hooked up to one of our live online courses, just press a button that allows you to ask questions. Those all come through to me as well. And I hope that I will see you in class very soon. And in Anna's case, see you again. But for now, good evening.